Record to the cloud. All right. So, welcome everybody to the Stories Around the Campfire series on Career Linguist. I'm thrilled to have with me as my storyteller today, Kathryn Ticknor, and she's going to be talking to us about her work in health research. And as I was just saying to her, I'm not going to do much of an introduction because her story will reveal to you information about herself, but we discussed that Kathryn brought a pocket example, as we like to say here at Career Linguist, that she wants to use to kick us off. So Kathryn, take it away.
Well, thank you. So, hi everybody. My name is Kathryn Ticknor, and I think often in our lives and our careers, we have these little moments maybe that illustrate for us what it is we should be doing. And I think we also have these moments, at least I certainly did, as linguists, where we think to ourselves, oh my gosh, linguistics is for me, this is what I want to do forever. And often our challenge then becomes, okay, how do we apply linguistics to that thing that fascinates us? So that's maybe my little intro spiel. But for me, I have always felt very, very motivated to want to try to help people, whether it be social justice related, whether it be in healthcare, in the environment, and I was having a lot of trouble trying to sort of pick one. In the meantime, my family has had some ups and downs with their own health. For me, this was something that had sort of just become normalized into our lives, and I didn't really think about it too much. In one particular moment, my father was in the hospital, as he was wont to be from time to time. I was visiting him, and he is someone highly educated, I think 3 degrees to his name. Certainly not someone who could ever benefit from health literacy, certainly not someone who would ever need a patient advocate by his side, very self-sufficient type person. But in this particular moment, he was sick. And in this particular moment, he was coughing up a lung. And in walks the doctor and says, we could give you some cough medicine for that. And he says no, and out walks the doctor. And in that moment, I thought to myself, surely there is something communicative happening, that a doctor offered him medicine, he said no, the doctor left, and remains a sick patient. So I dreaded sort of what was going on in that moment, what was I not picking up on? What was my father not picking up on? And what was the doctor not picking up on that resulted in a patient staying sick? So those were the sorts of things that I have now found very curious, and what I hope the types of problems that I'm solving. In the end, I was lucky enough to be able to say to the person sitting right there, why the heck did you say no to cough medicine? In the end, it came down to a very, in looking back on it, humorous misunderstanding, where the physician said to him, your cough is productive.
Oh no.
You're coughing things up, which my father interpreted as, what you're doing is having a positive effect on your situation. And that was just one moment for a very smart person that happens every day in our healthcare ecosystem, as we like to call it, that I hope that as a linguist I'm hoping to decode.
Wow. Yeah, I was remembering, I was on a plane earlier this week and remembering some of the research done on air traffic control, pilot communications, and hold in air traffic parlance means continue doing what you are doing.
Right.
So, right. So, someone had asked on a air traffic, they were on the tarmac and they were taxiing, and were told, should I stop now or carry on whatever they were doing, taxiing down the runway?
Yeah.
And I can't remember now who said, well, it must have been the air traffic controller said hold. And the pilot interpreted it with the conversational meaning of hold, which was stop. And the air traffic controller intended it with the air traffic control reading of it, which was go.
Right.
So the same exact word just means differently.
And that I have found we're so often assuming that someone's going to use some super technical jargon or some other register or some, specific type of lexicon that only exists for this particular profession. And no, it's all these words, right, that we're using in one way that someone else is using in another way, that so it never even occurs to us that a miscommunication has occurred until
could have occurred.
Yeah.
Man. All right. So we're in it already.
Yeah.
But because I know that what the people want, what the people need is to start maybe with, tell us what you do all day. How is it that you use linguistics as part of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work as a researcher in what probably looks often like a consultant to healthcare companies, often pharmaceutical companies or advocacy organizations. An example might be the American Heart Association, who want to better understand what is going on in the lives of people impacted by certain health conditions. My job is to communicate either directly or indirectly with those patients, usually the way that they have communicated with each other on online forums or with me through transcripts of conversations I've had with them, and try to get a better understanding of where there are miscommunications happening, how they are using language to present themselves, their symptoms, their unmet needs, and then put together reports for my client on how they can better, ideally, serve those populations. Sometimes it tends to take a more marketing stand, such as how can we better create materials that are targeted towards these folks. Other times it tends to take a little bit more of we want to develop a program that would better assist folks, but we don't really know what they need. How can we listen better approach?
Mm. So can you give an example of some, feature of language maybe that figured recently in an analysis? And I don't know how much, I don't want you to you don't have to reveal anything proprietary or.
I would say there are many applications where I get to use linguistics directly, but one that comes up a lot, especially when you're dealing with folks who are sick, is face work. And so in one particular case, it was a group of people with a rare disease. They had been through a lot to even get a diagnosis in the first place. So there was some interesting work going on with once you name a thing, what that does to people's own sense of identity. But B, the organization we were working with really their goal was to help, right? Let's develop some resources that will help people with this disease. However, they kept kind of tripping over their own language by assuming certain things. And by assuming, I mean the way that their materials were designed positioned these individuals as sick, positioned them as isolated, there's a whole lot of assumptions around what someone with this disease would have gone through. And when we actually went to that audience and did what to maybe a more academic linguist might look like field work,
ethnography,
exactly, they reacted very strongly to that language, with that sort of you don't know what I've been through, and when I read it this way, to me, it makes it sound like you're making assumptions of my experience. So that's just one thing.
And positioning me a certain way, positioning me as victim or positioning me as less powerful.
Exactly.
Which shuts you down.
Exactly. We also, as you can probably imagine, when working with pharmaceutical companies, are constantly walking a fine line between what you might call legalese and language that makes people feel comfortable. So our legal departments are always wanting to use phrases that are highly hedged with a lot of modals. This is how this product is thought to potentially work in the body. For people who actually need this medicine, that is not a very promising sales pitch. They often want to know, why can't you just say, this is how it will work for me? So just where is there a happy medium between language that doesn't make a false promise, but that still comes across as confident? So there ends up being a lot of nuance there, constrained by legal factors and human psyche.
And medical, I would imagine. There's also, the scientific training. Everything about becoming a scientist is learning how to hedge, how to not overpromise, reporting the findings without overstepping your claims.
And that's where I think you see elements like audience design and sort of professional vision so clearly. For the scientists, it never occurred to them that that was a weak statement or a hedged statement. To them, it seems perfectly clear that that's how the medication works.
It's technically accurate.
Exactly. And then when you show it to a stage 4 cancer patient, quite frankly, I'm not going to take my chance on something that might work. I want to know for sure you're confident in this.
Mm-hmm. So maybe it would help to kind of take a step back and take us through the steps that you've been taking lately. I know you've worked in health communication research, in a number of capacities.
Yeah.
Maybe, starting with how you got started and how and why you've navigated through different roles and what that has meant.
Yeah, absolutely.
You, in terms of how you solve problems in this world, right?
So I have had a relatively consistent client base, which I think, just from a kind of taking off my linguist hat for a minute, is interesting to think of just from a job seeker's perspective. Is I have had numerous jobs, and although my employer has remained the same, the people who I ultimately work for, the clients of my companies, have tended to be the same. So it's been nice to have that consistency, because I think one of the nice things of even when you are changing jobs is to get to know the industry that you're in. So in this case, healthcare, in addition to linguistics, ethnography, research. And I started off at Verilog after finishing the MLC, which was focused on similar research questions, but from the perspective of patient-provider interaction. We were doing a lot more focused on audio recordings and transcript of dialogues between those in-office interactions. So that was really fascinating to get that sort of ethnographic fly on the wall, or else you've perceived that you are, perspective. After a tenure outside of research, which I could get to in a minute, I am doing a similar type of work, but now focused again on more peer-to-peer interactions on social networks. And the company that I work for is called Inspire. And so now we have more of what I might call digital ethnography, where folks are gathering. It's written text, so you get a different form of communication. You have two different audiences, but it really has opened my perspective to the power dynamics that were at play inside the exam room, because you kind of, despite your best efforts, develop this perception that patients aren't engaged, patients aren't informed about their health, and then you see their interactions with peers, and it's a completely different dynamic. So
wow. So what you really start to see power.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the role that influences on interaction dynamics.
Wow.
And now I think I've talked about this before, or at least I mentioned it on my blog, then where, again, you sort of have to balance your two parts of your identity. Is I can find interaction dynamics very fascinating. Now I have to present that in a way that is meaningful to my lay clients or my non-linguist clients, in terms of, so what does that mean for them? And that's kind of always my challenge, is finding interesting linguistic phenomena in these interactions, but making sure that I then present them to my clients as something that can be informative to them, but also something that they can potentially do something about, or use as a tool to help the people they want to serve.
Do you feel that your analyses have changed significantly from these two data sets?
That's a great question.
Kinds of data sets?
I think that's a great question. I think that having both perspectives of realizing for example, now having the background of what the interactions are like in the exam room for the folks that I talk to now kind of gives me that deeper perspective. And I kind of now, it completes the picture.
Yeah, you need both.
Yeah.
And the point that you make about creating actionable recommendations, and you mentioned at the top that you often have different clients. Can you talk to us about, how you understand, or what that looks like, and how you understand the difference in working for an advocacy organization versus working for a pharmaceutical company, and what that's like for you?
Yeah. So sometimes it is not very difficult to find actionable insights if, for example, my client wants to design a brochure, because in that case they are creating a piece of communication, they are creating a communication material, and they have come to a linguist, and in that case we can make specific linguistic recommendations of what language should or shouldn't be included, how specifically the language should be structured, etc. If it is broader in scope, for example, understanding a group of people, and then in that case, then we're relying a lot on the sort of more ethnographic side of our toolkit. And in that case, usually what they want to know are questions around what is most important to these patients in the context specifically of their health, and where are their unmet needs that we might address. So, for example, while it may be important to that person's identity that they are struggling through a divorce, if that's not something that this group can address, then we don't put it in the report, that sort of thing. And in terms of pharmaceutical companies versus advocacy organizations, I have been lucky to work primarily with groups within pharmaceutical companies who are in the position to be supporting patients. I know certainly from an identity standpoint, big pharma isn't doing too well these days. But I think it feels good to kind of hold them to the fire and make sure that they include the patient perspective and the patient voice as part of the medications that they develop.
Change from within.
Exactly.
So how does your research help them? I mean, just in your shoes, I get a sense, I understand that they do, and I believe you, but
yeah,
how do your insights help them keep the client in mind?
So one area that we're doing a lot more with, and which personally excites me a lot, is in the area of clinical trial design and including patients in the actual process of designing the clinical trial.
Wow.
And I'll do
a clinical trial would be, you've got a diagnosis and right. You're given an opportunity to participate in some research.
Exactly. So just as you asked, first of all, you may not even really know what a clinical trial is. All you know is that you are very sick. And unfortunately, at this point, your doctor is telling you that you have exhausted the options currently in front of you. And at some point, if you are in a rare percentage, you may be offered to participate in a clinical trial. In the past, it was usually designed very much from the perspective that the drug developers could kind of we as scientists, we understand, right? Sometimes the experiments are designed to ensure that whatever comes out of the experiment is very clear. So for example, oh dear, so sad, you wear glasses, you can't participate. Or oh dear, so sad, you have taken this previous treatment, you can't participate. So exclusion criteria was very high. Or, oh, we didn't think about the fact that you need to drive 90 miles to get here and you're stuck with the tab for that. So all of these very, very real life implications for the participants were afterthoughts at best for those designing the protocols. Now, there has been a happy shift in the perspective to, well, yes, we need to make sure that we get data that is valid, but there's no need for the patient to be that much more miserable while participating. And what are the types of things that are meaningful to a patient? And we like to not make the assumption that patient is one big blanket category. So for example, a patient with pancreatic cancer is not going to need the same support systems as someone in a diabetes trial, for example. So going out, talking to them, doing some trial 101, educating what are your fears? Would you ever participate in the first place? And if not, why? And then B, how can we design a trial to ensure that it's the most comfortable and supportive environment for you while you're in it?
So much there. I would talk to you for hours, I think, unpacking, why it is that a pancreatic cancer patient needs a different clinical trial.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, I think, you said, how is what we do changing this? At the very basic level, someone listening to someone else at all is pretty new for this industry. Is pretty new for this industry. The idea that you have stakeholders with perspectives and a voice it has been taken for granted for a long time. And so I think it's good for linguists. We're going to be in demand. And of course, most importantly, good for having medications, trials, et cetera, a healthcare industry that actually reflects the people that it serves.
Because the thing about a clinical trial is it may give you access to some brand new way of treating it may well give you access to something that could save your life.
Exactly.
Well, you said in our initial chatting that you had a MedX experience that you wanted to share with us.
Yes. So, I am fresh from Medicine X, which, if you're familiar with TEDx, it's sort of this gathering of folks who share their perspectives. So I was very excited to be able to talk about linguistics in healthcare while I was there.
You gave a talk.
Yes, I gave a talk. I spoke on this whole concept of lay terminology often being where we find the most trouble in health literacy. So we talk about, for example, our tests coming back positive, and where else but medicine does positive mean something bad has happened. Enzymes getting elevated, usually elevated has a very cognitive association with positive things, not in medicine. So where are these specific traps in medicine for language? But I would just highly recommend checking it out. It was a very cool conference because it had, and I'm roughly estimating here, about a third clinicians, doctors, about a third tech, user experience designers, app developers, you name it, and then a third representatives of patients themselves, advocates who were there to say, I am who you are designing for. So I think it was a really cool example of where all of these different industries can mix, and linguistics was certainly considered part of this research user design field. So I think it speaks well for where we fit in. And yeah, so just, I would highly recommend checking it out. You can check out lots of really cool videos. One that I would specifically recommend is called In Support of Dogged Research. It includes two patients who ultimately sort of fought through research for their own therapy. So just a little shout out there.
That's awesome. And it's a perfect continuation of last week, where we talked to a user experience designer, and the week before where we talked to tech. It's all coming together.
It really is. There's homes for linguists in tech for sure.
Well, tell us, you did mention just now that you see lots of spaces for linguists.
Yes.
If you're talking to somebody who's just starting out, what would you say to them about how to think about their experience, how to talk about their experience, what to look for?
Yeah, so I think there's many different approaches. I wouldn't necessarily want to, prescribe a path. I will say for me, I was attracted to healthcare. I think that other times I hear from folks, I was attracted to working with technologists, and I didn't care if it was in healthcare or, transportation. It was that element of things. So I will say one of the wonderful things about healthcare, right, is it is such a huge sphere that you can take some time to figure out what part of it interests you. You know, I have been lucky to find my niche, which I feel very comfortable in, which allows me to do a lot of direct research, and people to people time. But I think the nice thing is that if you want to work much more directly with technologists, if you want to work much more on the advocacy end of things, all of that there's space for, and I think there's homes for linguists and all of that.
I was trying to call up that question. We had a question, was it on Twitter?
Yes.
For you?
I think we did have a question on resources for folks when using an interpreter in clinician encounters, which is a phenomenal question. And I'll just sort of hedge this myself by saying that I am no expert in this particular area. I think just to sort of recap for folks who may not be familiar with the challenge at hand here, we know that in a lot of cases, folks who could benefit from the presence of an interpreter are not getting one. And also in cases where folks are getting an interpreter, they may not have specifically the medical training or medical interpretation training, and that also contributes and exacerbates issues with translation. I will say the military often puts out good resources when it comes to this type of thing. We forget that they're one of the most diverse employers in the United States and have thought through a lot of these questions. So I often turn to some of their resources when it comes to health literacy, when it comes to translation. So they have a resource. I don't know if I can link it right in your chat, Anna.
Send me resources. I will put them in the post that, and I want you to share the TED, your MedX talk.
I will do that as well. But yes, so this is put out by, in collaboration with the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. It's really good. It talks not just about, what to do, but it also talks about the social dynamics at play. So that's a resource that I'd recommend for sure.
That's great. Dan, I'm unmuting you for a second in case you have any questions.
Yeah, no, it's been pretty thorough. I guess, you already kind of answered it, but my question was going to be is how actively are, within the healthcare industry, are people looking for linguists? But it seems like that's pretty active. So that was my next question.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I won't say that, our sales pitch is over in terms of framing what we do. However, at least in my specific area where folks are keyed into developing communication materials, specifically positioning their products, their trials to other to patient groups, they are aware of them. When you get into some of these other groups that I mentioned, if you'd be working more with technologists, oftentimes, and I think I've made this joke before, instead of how many languages do you speak, they want to know how many languages you code. There tends to be that assumption that maybe you're more of a computational linguist. That skill is also in high demand. So the answer is yes, we are definitely in high demand. Just be prepared to as usual, explain what you bring to the table specifically.
Can you remember back to when you were interviewing and first interviewing or recently interviewing again, misunderstandings about linguists or ways that your training was being maybe positioned in a way that didn't quite feel right? Or
yeah, I think, and this is a challenge that I have been reflecting on recently for myself, is the demand for linguists who do analytics, who do sort of big data, who do computational linguistics, which frankly I didn't focus on when I was in school. Now I think there is a rise to the occasion side of that, and hopefully we can I can be self-educating myself a bit more. I think there's also been situations where I have seen where it's sort of flipping that on its head a bit and saying, do you need a computational linguist, or sort of what is the problem you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
And often in that case where someone has sort of decided they need a data scientist or they need a computational linguist, the question that they have can be answered using our skill set, and maybe better answered using our skill set. But the person asking the question doesn't know what we do.
No. And I bet that comes up in client, I don't know to what extent you get to scope projects with your clients, but you mentioned that you could think about your work as a consulting firm.
Yeah.
And you also alluded to a blip in your past that maybe we should revisit. But I think in my work, certainly, there are lots of opportunities to manage these expectations, even at the level of client interaction.
Oh, yes.
Where the client thinks their question is one thing, and actually it may not be their question, and also there may be, a really different way of framing the question.
I think that's a great point. Whether it's, I think most commonly it's marrying the appropriate methodology perhaps with the question we're trying to answer, but to your point too, helping clients think, what are we going to get out of answering this question, thinking more broadly, et cetera. So we tend to, and this is the trouble, it was one of the topics that came up at MedX that I think was great. I keep thinking of it as professional vision. It was described slightly differently by a speaker there, but this idea of, we know what we know. We know we could use ethnography for this. We could use framework analysis for this. Our clients just don't know. And so helping them see what's possible, you don't need to design a brand new algorithm to understand how patients are talking about their symptoms. You can be in the position to guide your clients to what they actually want to get out of the research.
Mm.
A research Sherpa, really, is what I'm saying.
I love that. And I think we have a responsibility to sort of rank. I'm returning to that example. I love that example that you used to kick us off today, right? If the interaction stops because we've misunderstood the word productive, if that doctor had received, lots of ethnographic data about blah, 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 it wouldn't have been a moot point anyway.
Right.
Like there's an urgency, there's a
right.
Sometimes there's a salience, or there's a way that we can rank, we can help our clients understand our findings in terms of this first.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, those are nice pocket examples because they have that urgency. But often, especially when you're dealing with healthcare conditions, that sort of slow burn of not feeling spoken to properly does have a real impact. I mean, I think you've seen in certain conditions such as chronic migraine and other conditions that tend to be more marginalized, where that idea of no one is speaking directly to me, or not using words that resonate with me, just the impact that can have on access to care, on adequate treatment, et cetera. And so I tend to wax a little philosophic on this. Some may say that I've, drunk the Kool-Aid, but I do think that when we're identifying the, natural language that people who experience a specific condition live with, use, what is that natural language? And we are able to mirror it. That's where we start to establish trust between these huge companies up in their high tower and between the folks that they're hoping to serve.
Whose Kool-Aid is that? That sounds right to me. I mean, you always, when it's a situation of power, you always have to accommodate down.
Yep.
So interesting. So I want to know, my question is just how can people continue the conversation with you? Where can they learn more? How would you like for people to continue engaging with you?
I would just love to continue the conversation. I tend to be pretty responsive on social media, at least I think so. You can find me on Twitter, which I believe you have
I'll share.
shared. LinkedIn as well, and my personal email. Any of those are fine ways. I would also love to hear, and I don't know if we have some additional participants, but again, I am not the only one doing this, which is one of the exciting things. We have like a budding community of linguists working in healthcare, health communications, market research, medical market research. So join us if you're interested. If you have questions, we would love to support you. We've got a good group of people all around.
Yeah. One of the things I should tell you, I've used your LinkedIn profile, not your profile, your posts. So I work with people sometimes as they're preparing for job interviews. And I've been working with people who've been preparing for job interviews in the healthcare communication sector. So your LinkedIn feed you're killing it on LinkedIn, but you're sharing, and probably on Twitter too, but I guess I've recently been looking at LinkedIn. You do a great job of sharing not just, your own research, but relevant research that you're reading, and in a way that really guides the reader, pay attention to this linguistic feature in this analysis.
That's what I think helps, or at least my goal with that is to try to increase awareness in general of where the applicability of linguistics and by default, those of us who are linguists in our field. And I hope my goal is, and hopefully it's working, is just to continually do that. It's an interesting story, but notice how relevant linguistics was in this case. Next time a client happens to think, let's engage in research, linguistics won't seem like such a foreign concept. It'll seem like a directly applicable skill set.
Right, and so you're talking to linguists, but you're also talking to potential clients. You're talking to employers.
Yep. And I think I may have gotten a question as well on Sarah. So Sarah, I believe I answered your question, but let me just revisit it since you're on. I'm so glad you're able to join. I hedged a bit by just saying that, LEP, working with healthcare interpreters, is not my area of expertise, but I would recommend a resource that Anna is going to link to. It's called Improving Patient Safety Systems, which has a very sort of heavy sounding name, but it's put out by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And it's sort of developed with actually the US military in mind, which again is one of the most diverse organizations and diverse employers in the United States. And one of the reasons that I like this resource is it A, has very practical recommendations, and B, it talks not just about sort of what you can do, but also the sort of sociological factors, the communication dynamics of interpreting in healthcare visits. So I think they do a good job. I think they do a pretty comprehensive job of laying out what the problems are and what we can potentially do about them. So I think Anna will link to that document. And thank you for joining.
Awesome. All right, well, this has been great. Thank you, Kathryn. I hope everybody got a sense that Kathryn is very welcoming of questions. Over the years, you've been such a great advocate, champion. Thank you for everything that you do.
I would love to connect with anyone one-on-one. If you have a company you're interested in, an organization, you just want to talk more about what I do on the day-to-day. I know I gave a relatively broad overview, but if you want to get nitty-gritty, just let me know and I'm happy to connect.
Thank you so much.
All right.
So coming up in the campfire, yes, you're very welcome. It's my great pleasure. Mm-hmm. This is a joy. This series has been so easy to run. I take the lesson that I take is that this was it was meant to happen, because it's been so easy to find people and to organize everybody along this arc of, what are we doing? It really seems to be speaking to something that was needed. So next week we have Serena Williams at the Campfire. She's going to be talking to us about localization. And she also has a genealogy practice that is very interesting. Her twin interests, linguistics informs both. And we have another couple campers coming up in October. In November, the Campfire will go back inside the career camp. I am pleased to announce a career camp is going to be launching November 6th. And I guess this is how I'm going to start to think about this Campfire series going forward, that it came out of the camp. We had the Campfire weekly on Fridays, and what was happening was people were saying, I want to be a part of the Campfire. So I opened it up. So it will be public and available to the public to attend live when we don't have camp going on. And then when camp starts, we'll pull the Campfire back into camp just for the campers. But go to careerlinguist.com for information about camp or, this upcoming series, and stay tuned for development in the works, a social networking community that I think can be the missing piece, the way to engage with Kathryn on a real ongoing and sustained basis. So thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Anna, for having me.
Here's to what's next.
Yes. Bye.
Bye-bye.